today's session, after all our sessions that we had on the protocol, we started with IAM fundamentals. We moved on to the SAML protocol. Now, today is another protocol that we are going to discuss. The name of the protocol is OAuth. What does O means and what does auth means? Anyone?
Open
OAuth, what does it?
authorization.
Yes, open.
Authorization.
Yes, open authorization. Okay. So OAuth means open authorization, eventually signaling that this protocol is used for authorization purpose. Okay. Now, this is actually, I wouldn't say a very legacy or anything. This also got developed after SAML because, and if you see a lot of applications, Facebook, Google, and a lot of things, Spotify, wherever you are trying to log into an application, okay, where you just click on login with Google or Facebook or any of these options, right? And then it will not ask you for a username. It will simply say, fine, you have logged in, select which account you want. After that, it will allow you and you can give them the consent. Eventually, you are able to log into this application. That type of flow is called as OAuth flow. I will anyway show you in the next time when I am sharing. Okay. But to understand, OAuth means open authorization for anyone who has recently joined. And this protocol is used for authorization purpose only. Okay. That is how it all started. And now let's talk about where it is used. It is used for application. Okay. Apps. Whenever an application primarily want to just use authorization. Authorization in the sense, for example, yes, like Facebook login with LinkedIn, those kind of thing. So for example, if you have a set of attributes, right? You have email, you have first name, last name, and n number of attribute. Now, if you want an application to say, if you want to create a profile, just use the email. Okay. And the application will use your email, eventually creating a profile. But then if you look from a directory perspective, from a storage perspective, this system had everything. But this will only give access to your email for that particular application to create your profile and grant you access to the application. This is called authorizing app 1, right? To use the information on Google data store. Okay. And then allowing the app to create your profile on behalf of you so that you can log in. Okay. Now let's talk about the benefit. Okay. So before we move, any question? Is this clear? This is a very basic explanation of OAuth, but any question in this on what is OAuth? OAuth is the authorization protocol. Simple. What does it stands for? Open authorization. Okay. Now let's talk about, and we know where it is used. It is used mostly for application that do not want to create any profile and are primarily dependent on a different identity provider, I would say here, to fetch the information from there and create the profile. Use that information to create the profile. Okay. Now let's talk about like how the entire OAuth functionality work. Okay. To understand OAuth, you should understand the different components of OAuth. Okay. So the first component of OAuth is something called as a client. What is a client? Any guess? You can put it on the chat also.
Browser.
No. I'll definitely answer this question after I explain this. Application. Yes. Client is an application. So for example, if we are planning to log into Ghana, one of the application, right? This is the client. Now there are different other components. Okay. Let's say there are 3 different components all combined into one. This is your IDP in our case, in our language. And you can also call this as again authorization server, resource authorization server also. Okay. Now here inside the authorization server, okay, what do you have? You have the authorization endpoint, token endpoint, user info endpoint. Okay. These are the three systems sitting inside the authorization server. Now, what happens? How does it work? It works by saying the client will go to the system and will say, hey, this user wants me to create a profile for this particular user and log the user inside the application. Can you share me some information about the user? The authorization server will say, okay, I will share you, but how do I trust you? So there is some information that this guy will send. And based on this, authorization endpoint will say, okay, take this code because I don't have the information. I can give you a code, right? Using this code, the client will go to the token endpoint and he'll say, hey, I have got this code. Now, can you give me information of the user? Token endpoint will say, I can give you a token because I'm the token endpoint. I don't have any information. You have to go to another endpoint to fetch the information. So token endpoint will give them a token back in exchange of the code. Okay. Then the client will take this token, go back to the user info endpoint and say, take this token and send me the user info. Now in this user info, based on certain details, blah, blah, I'll cover them, all of them. Okay. The client will receive the user information and go back to its application and create a profile and log the user in. Okay. So this is how OAuth works. Okay. So any question from anyone? Is it that clear or you guys do not understand anything? I mean, no question?
It's clear. It's clear actually.
Okay, fine. So I'm actually also admitting few members. Now, coming back to the question, why apps come out of SAML and use OAuth? First thing, OAuth is an authorization protocol. And if an application just wants to use authorization, they use OAuth. If they don't want to use something, what is that something? Why do organization application use SAML for? Guess. Why is SAML used? For what?
Can I explain that part? Ravi, in simple terms, or do you want them to answer?
No, I'm asking the question. Why application use SAML?
So, SAML is mostly for authentication and authorization. OAuth is generally restricted to authorization itself.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Vishek. Yes, authentication. So if an application wants to use authentication for their application, right? That is where they go with SAML. If they just want to use authorization, they go with OAuth. That is first use case. Second, when you're working with OAuth, right? OAuth does not save your password. Okay. So this is also one of the reason why OAuth is used, because if you log into Ghana, which I'll show you, over there, if Ghana gets compromised, which is a usual scenario, right? Like a lot of applications get compromised. One benefit that OAuth gives you is, as you're not storing any password, Google's password in Ghana, even if Ghana gets compromised, your Google, maybe the information that you're sharing, for example, your email, that may get compromised, but your password remains safe. So that is one benefit. Second, when you're sorry, okay. So second is when you're trying to improve the security also, specifically when you're trying to deal with mobile applications. Okay. That is also one of the case where OAuth comes very handy. From an integration perspective, when you talk about application integration, OAuth has very few basic configuration. Even on the developer side, from a developer perspective also, it is easier to set up an OAuth app compared to a SAML application. So these are main reasons why modern applications are preferring SAML and other different protocol compared to OAuth and OpenID compared to SAML. Okay, so these are OAuth credentials. Yes, you don't need to enter any credentials, Parshuram. In SAML, XML is used, but OAuth token is used. Thank you very much. Yes, absolutely. Shubhankar, do you want to add anything on the SAML versus OAuth use case, like why part?
Yes. So mostly when we talk about SAM, we get a seamless single sign-on experience, right? So the authentication is very seamless. So the user, when he is authenticated, he can access each and every part of the application. But with OAuth, we have something called fine-grained authorization. So what each part of the application can, like, if I get access to an application, each part might require a different level of authorization, which can be implemented with the help of OAuth, and which is not easily possible with SAML. That is one. And SAML is mostly used when the trust between like organization is very high. So when we have a third party application, so like when you're integrating applications like ServiceNow, these are third party applications. Okay. And the trust levels between like when we are trying to configure SAML is very high. Okay. And like most of the 95% of the time when you're trying to configure an OAuth application, they will be in-house applications like nowadays are configured using the OAuth OIDC protocols like 99% of the time. So these are the two add-on things that I would like to in. Did I miss anything, Ravi?
No, absolutely. That is all correct. And yeah, it's more convenient. And then main use case is mobile apps use case, right? And then the convenient for the developer. OAuth is very developer friendly. Okay. So next question is, so when a new app configure login with FB or login with LinkedIn, they have integration with LinkedIn and they use user info endpoint to get the email address. In this way, so no local users created in this application. Yes, that is one benefit. The application do not have to maintain anything, right? Simple. They don't have to maintain any configuration on their side. They will go fetch, complete the authorization, create the profile, done. That's it. Okay. So Shubhankar, while I am sharing this, actually I am on my tab. Can you be ready to just show the Ghana and Google session, like how it is configured? Just be ready in few minutes. Okay. You can quickly share and show.
The application?
Just log into Ghana, and from there, you can select login with Google. And then I just want to show how that OAuth particularly works.
Give me one.
Okay, yeah. No, take your time. I'll tell you in maybe a few minutes. Pratima has a question. Can you elaborate more on why OAuth are used for in-house apps and why OAuth is more secure? OAuth is more secure. First thing, OAuth is not storing your password. It is going fetching out of all the 100 information. So let me again draw that here, Pratima, if you can see the screen. So for example, if this is the repository, okay, this may have multiple IDs, email, last name, first name. And imagine this is the Google repository, right? Your phone number, calendar, a lot of things. Okay. Now, if you are trying to log in to Spotify using OAuth, Spotify will just go fetch the required attributes. Say, for example, email, come and create a profile for you. Tomorrow, if any of these application gets compromised, your email may get compromised, but your entire password, other information is here. That is one of the main benefit. Okay. Now, in-house application, because now this is from a security perspective. Now, from a deployment perspective, when you say in-house, right, it is in-house developers. So they have to develop. This is not a commercial application that you'll have many developers working into it and designing it and doing all of this, right? So you want to quickly build something and integrate it and make it working. And this is where OAuth is a very developer friendly protocol. You have APIs, endpoints, configure them, start from Postman, move on to deploying it on a Node.js. From there, move into a different server, put up a load balancer, use all the best practices. You're good, done there. Okay. So these are the main two reasons. When you have specifically say in-house, this is why you use OAuth for. Is that clear, Pratima? Any other comment on that? Any queries?
Just I'd like to add one thing. So when we say OAuth is more secure, so OAuth generally deals in the form of tokens, the access token, refresh tokens. So when these tokens are issued, these tokens are easily revoked. Okay. And the chances of and since the user credentials are not shared with the client, so that makes it more secure. We just share access tokens or ID tokens. So the tokens also that are shared like they are very short-lived. So if we want to revoke it, we can revoke it at like very limited time. And if we want, as I said, if we want to implement like fine-grained authorization, we can do that using scopes in OAuth.
So once
it
again,
provides-
Shubhankar, sorry to cut you down. Whatever you said is absolutely right. But then again, I'll definitely cover those things. So, okay. Absolutely, you are right. But then I know what confusion that would create, because there are so many words that you have just thrown out, right? And each and every word is true. But let's go gradually, and eventually in the end, right? Just try to cover all of this, what you said. Okay. At that time, it'll definitely make sense.
Sure.
Fine. Okay. So, yeah, now let's move on to a small demo, right? Shubhankar, I'll just give you, click on permissions, and then I can give you screen sharing.
Like host disabled participants screen share.
One sec. Share the screen, and then you can make me the host later after this.
Okay. Let me know if my screen is visible.
Yeah, it is visible now. So this is the Ghana application, right? And you can try it with any application. So here, if you go to login,
Give me one second.
no, don't enable anything, Shubhankar, now. This is just what happens. This will be required when everyone has the knowledge of the different flows, right? Then definitely this is the next step that we'll do. For now, I just want to show how for everyone, how OAuth basically works. So OAuth is when you go to login and sign up, right? You have these many options. You can continue as Shubhankar, you can continue with your other email. You can also log in. All of these are options are available. But you will continue with Google. So click on continue with Shubhankar. Yeah. Now here, be in this page. It asks you for, and see on the top, there is a client on the top, right? Client ID something. So this is the request that we'll be talking about in the next in few minutes. Okay. So now here, this will let you choose which account. So this account is Google, where I showed you, right? Google has all the information. So from here, Ghana is requesting Google that your user wants to log in. Which account do you want the user to, which account do you want Ghana to go and access and fetch the user information from? Here you can, again, you can consider this as your organizational directory also. Okay. That any application is requesting access for. So here you can click on any of one of this. Okay. Now, once again, this is where it is saying confirm you want to sign in. This is a consent. Okay. Consent. Click on confirm once again. Fine. And that's fine. So in that screen, if you saw, it was saying it will share your name and email and those information, right? And then you said yes. Now what happens if you go to your profile on the top, click on profile? You have not created anything on Ghana, right? But still, if you go to the profile, there'll be three information. You click on that arrow. Yes. There'll be three information: your name, email ID, gender. Where did this come from? This came from the Google authorization server. Yes, Asif. Google was containing. And now if you think from a Google perspective, do you only have these three information, or do you have your calendar, your email, your phone number, and many other information in Google, right? But you gave consent to only use these information. And eventually on the back end, a lot of things happen, which we will talk in detail. And Google went, fetched the relevant information that Ghana requested for, and then only gave those information back to Ghana. Ghana used it, created your profile, and you're in. So tomorrow, if Ghana or any application that you're using through OAuth gets compromised, these information will be leaked, but not your password or anything. So is it clear on how this flow would work? Flow works? Any question? No question? Okay. Now let me, Shubhankar, make me the host. Not the why not, okay? Like my full email ID.
Then.
Yeah, thank you. So now moving back to Yes.
Ravi, I just have one question here. So before for any type of application, and if I wanted to onboard it while selecting a security purpose, that is authentication and authorization, what are the different parameters I need to consider while selecting and these protocols?
Which protocol?
Suppose I have two choices. It's in SAML or so. Is there any standardization for that one so that I can compare it and implement it? Depend on the requirement.
So mostly from a BA perspective, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Asif, you are absolutely right. It basically, there are two ways. One is what app supports, right? Second is if the app is coming to you on-prem and they want to build something and they are like clueless what to do. In that case, you can give them, see, SAML is this, because as an IDP, you support both, right? Now you'll have to tell them the pros and cons of SAML. SAML is XML based. So you can find this anywhere, right? And you have to give them what information they will need if they are configuring a SAML app. You'll have to give them, for example, if you're using Okta, give all the Okta APIs, okay? That they will, all documentation that they can refer. If it is ping, give all the documentation. So this is where you can give them, you can enable them to have all the information about SAML and OAuth and OpenID and tell them what is the protocol that they can choose. As a IDP, you cannot tell them you just go ahead with this SAML or OAuth or OpenID until this is the standard set by the organization. If your organization is trying to move to a place where you want everyone to be migrated to OpenID Connect by end of this year, definitely it is a clear move strategy from the organization. You just simply go and tell the same thing and explain them the pros about these particular protocol. Okay. But if you're not sure, give them options, pros and cons of both the protocol. Let them decide what is more beneficial for them. That is how you can move forward when you are trying to set up or when you are trying to help an application team integrate an application. Okay. But there is a, what do you call, an intake form which has information about what you capture in OAuth and what you capture in SAML. I'll share that with you. Okay. I'll take a picture and I'll share it to you.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Any other questions from anyone? All good? Okay, fine. So anyways, we just have maybe an hour. Okay. So I'll just quickly cover it. So now let's talk about, so first is, you know how it talks. Now let's talk about the different ways in which it talks. Okay. Then I will go what information is sharing. So first we said why, we discussed about why OAuth. Okay. What is OAuth? How it works. Okay. Then some of the examples on OAuth versus SAML use cases. Okay. So these are the things that we have discussed. Okay. Now we'll be discussing about more detail. What are the different components that is coming in play? Okay. So the first component, as we know, is client. And the second component is authorization server, token endpoint, user info endpoint. Okay. And there are a lot of endpoints also. But let's now go back and discuss about the different ways in which it works. You know how, but ways. Now that ways I'll call grant types. Okay. Grant types. The first grant type is called authorization code flow, auth code. Then we have implicit. Auth code also has a Pixie version. Pixie is proof key certificate exchange, right, Shubhankar?
Yes, Ravi.
Okay. Implicit. And then we have the client credentials. And then we have the resource owner password grant.
And we have some more like device grant flow, token exchange. These are the four.
Proof key code exchange. Yes. Yeah. That is right, Pratima. Thank you. Now, primarily, when you integrate an application, you will have to tell them, ask the organization or the team what flow they would want to choose. Okay. Now, auth code is auth code plus auth code with Pixie is definitely one of the most secured flow, right? Organization use this most of the time because of certain reason which we'll discuss. Implicit mostly used for a single page application because there is no backend for a single page application. That is one of the main reason. And again, a single page means you cannot put too much security. So the app has to be used internally only, right? And there are certain information that implicit shares that you should not be exposing the application externally. Then you have client credential, which is primarily used mostly for testing purposes, right? Like client to client, machine to machine communication. One machine is a good example is Postman to any of the application APIs. These are the two systems that are talking to each other. ROPG is again, you can use this, but then you are more dependent. Here, there are again certain information which you cannot send over the internet. Okay, you really need a secure channel to send information when you're talking to the client or between the client and authorization server. When they talk to each other, certain parameters are sent, which is a very critical parameters, very important parameters, right? Which cannot be exposed on the internet. Hence, auth code is the top that you would recommend anyone. Then comes implicit testing cases. You can use client ID and ROPG. And here an enhancement using a certificate is Pixie. Now there is one more. If anyone wants to go through it, it is called Depop. Okay. So you can use this Depop. Understand this. I will not go into detail because many organizations have not even started using Depop. Okay. So just do your research here and let me know if you find anything interesting on Depop. Okay. So now this is the ways and different grant types. Is it clear? Okay. Let me see if there are any questions. Device grant flow. Refresh token on. I wouldn't say refresh token is a separate flow. Refresh token is when you are trying to request for a refresh token, you enable this flow. Yes, if you are talking about ping and any IDB, they let you select that. Okay, if you are selecting refresh token, you will get refresh token. But separately, if you look from a very high level, these are all using even the device type, right? Device grant. So this is to enable capabilities in within the flow. But high level, eventually you cannot say that you don't want to use client credential and you just want to use refresh token flow. It comes in conjunction with these flows. Okay. So anything, Shubhankar, that you want to add? You had something.
What is the question, Ravi?
No, do you want to add anything? So yeah, can you please brief about ROPG? I have not actually briefed anything about anything yet. Okay. So ROPG is basically resource owner password grant on a high level. And this is mainly used again for integration purposes only. Okay. But you don't use these type of flow very often because of the information that it carries. It carries some very confidential information in the form of a request parameter, which we'll be going to cover next. Okay. So now that we have covered the different ways in which these flow, these particular OAuth work, right? Now let's talk about what is inside that flow, how they talk to each other. Let's talk on that part. Okay. So let me erase this.
Ravi,
Yes.
Pawan here.
Yeah, Pawan.
When I gone through Okta, these four flow types I've seen:
Mm-hmm.
implicit, cold flow, authorization, refresh token, through the documentation, that kind of thing.
Try to just go and see what is the response, or sorry, what is the information that they are sending.
Okay.
I think that will give you more clarity. See, if there is a small change in the response, right?
Yeah.
Where you're just sending,
Okay.
changing one value. Okay.
Yeah.
You will not consider that as a flow. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you talk about these four flows, there you are completely changing the structure of how your data is being sent.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, have a look. Okay. And see, mainly you have to look on the response type and the body and the parameter that you are sending, the information that you are sending. Okay. So coming back to the information, coming back to the information. Okay. Now, I'll answer the question in a little bit. Okay, you can just post it. I'll definitely answer each and every question. So if you talk about this client trying to interact with an authorization server, okay, let's say. Definitely when they are interacting, there is some information that they are sending, right? So what are they sending? The first thing is let's talk a client ID. Okay. Second is a client secret. Now, not all these information are sent at once, but these are the information that is contained in those messages. Okay. You have the client secret, client ID, redirect URI. Client ID and client secret, either you can generate on the client side, send it to the IDP and ask them to configure it, or you can auto generate it on the IDP side and then send it to the application. This specifies, it is a specific, a very unique, I would say, combination that through which the IDP tries to establish this communication and trust between the client, or vice versa. This is the information which is stored on both the side, and when they are talking, everywhere it is trust only. I think if you're not able to see my screen, can you move a little bit here and there? I have just changed the position. Anyone not able to see the screen? Click on minimap and then see where I've started writing. Okay. So client ID and client secret is the combination. It is basically a key and a key pair, a username and a password kind of a pair, where you can use this, okay, primarily to establish connection with the authorization server. Okay. So now, just 1 second, guys. I'm just zooming in. Second, okay. Yeah. So now redirect URI. Does everyone remember what is an ACS URL? What is an ACS URL in terms of SAML?
Consumer URL.
Assertion.
What does it do?
It through the certificate, entity ID, and
No, what is an ACS URL used for?
It will increase the SAML attribute section once the authentication is done from SSO side. So
Received, right?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So here also, when you talk about OAuth and OpenID, this is the location where the authorization server will send the information back to the client. So this is the receiving endpoint. It is not equal to the SAML ACS URL, but if you think from a function perspective, this is the endpoint which is actually receiving all the information that the authorization server is sending, and this represents the client. This is client's
It is the application
address.
URL, Ravi. Is the application URL?
Yes. Client means application. Whenever I'm referring to client, that means the application in an organization. And authorization server, whenever I'm saying, this could be any IDP that you're using, Okta, Ping, ForgeRock, anything, SiteMinder, anything that you're using. Okay, that is how the whole setup is. So imagine this as SiteMinder, anything, right? And this is your application. Okay. Then you have something called a scope. Now, what is scope? Scope decides what level of permission you need in that particular application. For example, if you need access to their email, profile, address, that is where you define this while establishing the or trust. Okay. Yeah. Anyone, anything? No question. Okay, fine. Scope is where you are defining the level of access. You have redirect URI. Then you have state. State is basically a value that enhances the security. It will say that if the state of the entire conversation, right, whenever you are transferring data from one side to another, if the state remains constant, that means the data has not been spoofed anywhere. Okay, so there is no man in the middle attack, and the integrity of the data is constant. So in order to ensure that the integrity remains constant, you are actually adding the state value. Okay. So client ID secret, redirect URI, and then scope is defined. Anything, Shubhankar, that I have missed? Secret, redirect, scope, state.
Nonce value, there is a nonce value also.
Nonce is there. Yes.
So nonce, so in order to understand or like to verify that the token that was generated has not been spoofed in between, the nonce value is there. So when we send the request, we have a nonce value attached to our request. Now, if the nonce value changes in between, that means the token has been tampered in between. So it has been hijacked. Okay. And when we move towards our Pixie, two more things get added. One is your code challenge and the other is code verify. But when we do Pixie, we'll come.
Okay.
Apart from this, scope, speed, nonce. There was one more thing. I am forgetting the name. I'll have to look at my notes, but I'm forgetting.
Response type, I think we also
Yes.
send.
Response
That
type
is
and
what was
response
missing.
mode. Response mode.
Response type. Okay.
And
Response.
mode.
What is the example of response mode?
Query, fragment,
Mm-hmm.
response
And
type
this is
is
token, code, right? So
password.
scope can be email, can be profile, right? Redirect URI can be any URL. Client ID secret is the combination. Okay. So whenever the entire communication is happening, okay, these are the information that gets exchanged between the client and the authorization server and the token server and the user info endpoint server, and only then you will be able to finally retrieve the information. The client will be able to retrieve the information and then grant you access to the application. Okay. So now let's talk about what are the different stages and how those information is getting exchanged. Okay. So for that, I'll just quickly stop sharing and then I will open my presentation. Okay. In the meanwhile, if you have any queries, feel free to discuss. I'll just take maybe a few minutes. No question from anyone? Good. Okay, just give me a minute. Okay, so I'll share. Okay, so I'll just quickly show you how these flow would work. Okay, through by logging into a URL. Okay, but for now, I'll just show you this. I'll show you some how different applications are using. And I don't want to go over presentation and all, because I'll show you in a live application page, which is from a product company, where they have put up all the things for free on the internet. And that is the information that the application team uses to configure their site. Okay. So when you talk about the auth code, okay, there is a part 1 flow, and then there is a part 2 flow. Okay. Now what happens before this, I will talk about one more thing for people who have joined a little late. Okay. So part 1 is you have client, part 1. Okay. And then you have where this is the authorization server, authorization endpoint. Okay. Then you have the token endpoint. One sec. Okay. So this is part 1, and then when it goes to the token endpoint, right? This is part 2. Okay. So this flow has 2 part. When a client is trying to interact with the authentication endpoint, let's talk this as authentication endpoint, and then you have the token endpoint. Okay. These are the 2, part 1 and part 2. Now let's see. Now we are going to understand what is that information that is actually being sent as a part of part 1, and what information is being sent as a part of part 2, and what is the response you're getting in part 1 and response you're getting back from here in part 2. This is what we are going to see now. Okay. So let me stop and share that. You can see my screen, right? The Node Plus.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. So this is the information that the client is sending as a part of part 1. Okay. So what will it send? It will first send a request to the authorization endpoint. This is the authorization endpoint. It should go to some endpoint, right? The authorization endpoint is hosted on the IDB side in our case. I'm just saying this is IDB, but then you will anyways, you can call it as anything, right? You can call it as authorization server, authorization endpoint, or just to talk about the system, you simply say IDP. Okay. Now, the first is the first is it will go and try to connect to the authorization endpoint, and hence you will see this URL, right? This will be your company name. Okay. .com, and again subdomain plus you can put this is your basically your company's domain plus whatever you have set up for your application for your IDP's host name. Okay. And then OIDC/2/auth. And then you have the client ID. The first thing that you'll be sending is a client ID. We all know what a client ID is. Redirect URI so that the client can receive the information back into the same URI. Response type is code, and that means that they want to perform authorization code flow. If the response type is token, that means that the application is saying let's do implicit flow. Okay. So response type is when it is saying that I want to perform authorization code. Hence it is saying response type means what response I want to receive. Code. That is the response it is saying. I want to receive a response which has a code. That is why it says response type is code. Scope is OpenID Connect. And here scope could be profile also or address also. Let's not talk about this. Okay. Now, when this info, yeah, any question?
Yeah, it will allow with when it authorizing with the client ID and client secret, right?
In the first flow, you don't need client secret. That is where. So, what I spoke earlier, I gave you the list of the request parameters. Okay. Now, there will be a combination that you'll use here and there. Okay. So, first is it'll use client ID, send a request to the authorization endpoint, which will have redirect URI response type scope. Okay. Now, what will the authorization endpoint give back to the client?
Code.
Yes.
Response code.
This is client. It'll give back a code, which will be in this format. Again, these are all sample, okay? And then the state. So that if it should not change, the integrity should remain the same. Once this code is given, part 2 start. Part 2 is again the client will go to which endpoint? Client
Token
will go to which
endpoint.
endpoint? Token endpoint, yes. Okay. Now then it'll say it'll send a request to this. Now I'll just quickly share the entire URL page itself. So here, let's look at this page. Now you'll see here, okay. Okay. Here you will see this is the second flow, right? This is the endpoint that it is going to send the request. Okay. Now what is there on the authorization header? What will be sent as a part of authorization header? They will send the client ID, client secret set to base 64 encoded. Okay. Now this is where the client content type will be this. Okay. This resource parameter will be the subdomain. Request parameter grant type will be set to authorization code. Then the code will also be sent. Redirect URI is there. Client ID is there. Client secret is there. Code verifier is there. The plain text string that was sent as a code challenge in step 1. Okay. Then request is this. This is how the request would look like. If we go back here. Okay. Now, once it is sending this request, what is the response it gets? This is the response it gets. It gets the access token. Because we are performing OAuth, we will only get access token. Let's forget about this. There is no OpenID Connect in play as of now. Okay. So that is why we will be getting access token. Expires in 3600. This 3600 will be in second, minutes or hour. Any guess? 3600 that you see. This will be in seconds, minutes or hour. Yes.
Seconds.
So that means
1 hour.
1600 seconds. Yes, 1 hour. Okay. Token type is bearer. Refresh token is this. Now let's talk about refresh token. Access token is basically when you receive an access token, you go and based on this, it'll go to the user info endpoint, fetch the details, and give you access. Now, when your access expires in 3600 second, which is an hour, the role of refresh token is so that you don't go and request login and perform all of that again. Refresh token, if it is enabled, will go and fetch a new set of access token and refresh token for you before the existing access token expires. That is where the role of refresh token comes in picture. And again, from a security perspective also, if someone hacks your credentials or they try to log into the application and they don't have the same session or the same token, this is where it is an enhanced layer of security. You will only get the refresh token, again, getting you the new set of new set of access token and refresh token only if it is the same session, same browser where you are maintaining all of this. But if it is someone else, it won't. It'll again ask you to re-authenticate. So this is one of the main reason for using refresh token. Okay. Now, any question before I move on further. This is clear, the flow and what is inside the flow, why it is being used, all of that is clear now. Any questions? All good? Okay. Now, I'll share my screen and we'll talk about the implicit flow. Okay. So, implicit is, this is what you send as a part of implicit. Client ID, redirect URI, response type, scope. Scope, again, let's take scope as profile. Okay. Now, before I get into this, let me explain you what happens. Here in implicit flow, right? You don't have this. Okay. Implicit is simply saying that I don't have any backend. Now, before I move on to this, okay, let me talk about channels. Okay. Now, if you talk about channels like front end and back end like that, this is happening on front channel, this is happening on back channel. Okay. Front channel in sense browser. You are actually getting the code on the browser itself. That is what you saw, right? When we were logging into Ghana, you saw the code on the front end itself, front channel. But this token is happening on the back end, back channel, on the server level. Okay. That is one main difference. Now, when you talk about an application which is a single page application, SPA, it does not have this. This is one main use case to use implicit. Hence, this whole concept is gone. Nothing to store anything on the back end, back channel. It just has front channel. Hence, the overall concept is client goes with some request parameter, goes to the access authorization endpoint and says, give me a token, it'll give them a token back. Simple. It uses the token, performs authorization. Now imagine everything is happening on front channel. Anyone can come and spoof this request. And token is a very important component of the entire flow, of the entire transaction. This has the user information. I wouldn't say user information, but what the user would want and basic set of information. This should be protected at any cost. Token is basically a key to your house. You'll not leave it open, right? So, in order for this to prevent any kind of man in the middle attack, or there are a lot of ways in which a token can be spoofed, even though you use all the recommendation, that is a different story altogether. But the overall purpose is, as you cannot go with this state outside the internet. Hence, if an application team wants to use it, they will have to restrict this within the internal network only. That is what one of the use case for SPA application use implicit, but then the condition is when you are recommending as a business analyst or as a IAM engineer, when you're talking to application team, right? Tell them like this is one of the reasons why implicit is not being used outside the network, because it just has front channel, single page application. If you go out, it's gone. Token is exposed. There is no protection there. Okay. You may have firewall and a lot of things there, but that is not enough if your protocol itself is not protecting it. Okay. Now, how this works, let's go back again. So there, if you look at the entire, this is client sending request to the authorization endpoint. Okay. Here we'll say HTTPS. This is the auth endpoint. The client ID, redirect URI. And here you will say the response type will be token.
Ravi, so when we try to access any application, this entire flow happens, or like choosing any authorization server, it happens? When does this flow happens?
So this is when you're trying to access any application based on the flow type. If you are accessing an application which is using implicit flow, this is the flow that happens. If you are accessing an application which is configured with auth code flow, This is the
Okay.
flow that happens, part 1 and
So
part
yeah, once I try to, like as per the previous example, when we choose to access Ghana application, once we click on the URL, the backend it happens. Yeah?
2. All of this is what is happening on the back end.
Yes.
Front end, you will just see you did 3 clicks, but this is what is happening. Okay. And yeah, so the first, here there is just one part where the client is requesting details to the authorization endpoint, and this is the information that it sends. One main difference is whenever the response type on an implicit grant type is token, the response type on an auth code is code. That is one main difference that you'll see. And once this information is sent by the client to the authorization server, the response that it gets is, and then these are the values also that you have to send as a part. This is the same value: client ID, redirect URI, response type, scope, nonce, state, prompt. These are a lot of our optional values. Okay, optional. Okay. Now, what is the response you get? You directly get the token from AE to C. You get the token directly. Use this token, not the ID token, but just the token, because we are still in OAuth world. The moment we go to the OpenID world, you get ID token as one of the token value. Okay. So with this, I will wrap up today's session. Okay. And tomorrow we'll discuss about the other 2 type of grant types, and we'll initially start to do some lab and setup. So I will stop sharing and open for question for another 5 minutes. Asif, there is a wind blowing on from your back. Sorry, I heard nonce.
How the nonce works?
Like the primary purpose of the nonce, right? Like to avoid tampering, authenticity. Okay, like I did not understand how it works in the sense like you add the nonce when you're, so eventually the best part of using OAuth is everything is set up by the client. I really get happy when an application team chooses OAuth, OpenID, because from a, and if there are issues, I know straight up that if my other applications are working, and if this is the only application, it is an issue on the app side 90% of the time. Because if you have 100 application configured on OAuth using the same authorization server, if there is an issue, 99 of them will also fail. But if all of them are working, I know it is the client that might have gone wrong, because everything, the request, the initiation point is the client only. I'm coming, Asif, to back to your question. This is just the context that I'm trying to give, because everything that you're doing here, right? You're talking about setting up the first flow, part 1, part 2, anything that you're doing, everything is initiated by the client. You are just at the receiving end, right? You have the client, go send a request to AE. It will give you the information. Now, this AE is the same AE for other 100 applications, right? So eventually, if this goes wrong, other 100 apps also goes wrong. But if only this guy is complaining, somewhere something has been configured incorrectly, because they initiate the request. There is nothing that these guys are doing, right? Yes, if they are saying that they are getting the code and after that it is failing, even then you go and tell them, like, see, others are getting the token. So coming back to your question, Asif, nonce is actually set on this level only. How? In the sense, you just, it is a random string that you generate, okay? And eventually through the entire transaction, you expect the nonce value to remain same, so that you are ensuring that the integrity of the token is constant and there is no man in the middle or anything spoofed. Anyone has not spoofed your token.
Yeah.
Can we assume AE as an authorization server? Or
Sorry?
can we assume AE as an authorization server? Or
A will reside inside the authorization server. And this is the endpoint. Imagine, for example, if you talk about a server, right? Now, server will have different endpoints, APIs that you will try to connect.
yeah,
Similarly, this server is authorization server. Under that, they have an endpoint which is an API, which is the authorization endpoint. and you have token endpoint and various different endpoint introspection. There's that, all of this. Okay, but eventually everything will be inside that server, and that is what we called as our ping server, or like ping Okta, wherever you use, right? These are the actual server that is deciding, that is storing all this information. Is it clear, Asif, like where the nonce is set?
Yeah, Ravi, one more question. Will
Yes.
it get encrypted at AE end?
Now, the moment you talk about encryption, see here, there is no encryption. Okay. Nonce is a direct string. You send it, you receive it, send it, receive it. Just to now, when you talk about PXE, that is where your encryption topic comes into picture. Here, there is no certificate involved in anywhere. So, if there is no certificate, there is no encryption by default. Okay. Nonce values, yes, Pratima, that's what I said in the beginning. Now, there are so many different ways in which a token can be compromised. Basically, even if you're, see, one way someone is changing your token, other is someone is stealing your token. Everything is happening, but imagine you are doing all the transaction in a hacker's network. They can see everything, right? In that, nonce remains the same. Your token is not compromised. Nothing is happening, but they have all the information. So that is also one of the use case. Now, okay, I'll stop my screen. I'll go back to the question. As an architect, decide on which grant type to be used for OAuth integration. Like I mentioned earlier, auth code most of the time with PXE, if the application supports the entire additional mechanism of PXE. Implicit single page application, not recommended if the app is outside the internet. Client credential, mostly for machine to machine communication. And if you are doing testing on Postman internally, right, use client credential. ROPG, yes, there are certain parameters that has been passed, we'll cover tomorrow. So hence that is also not recommended. But based on use cases, auth code with PXE, enhancement, depop, those kind of thing. And then internally try to restrict client credential flows like implicit, ROPG internally only. Don't let these flows get exposed to the internet. Again, how can we sure token is not compromised? You cannot, like one of them is nonce. Second is to use these additional factors, like you can use a firewall, you can use HTTPS, SSL, you can encrypt the entire traffic. These are the different ways, Pratim, on a perimeter level that you can put for in order to ensure. See, you can ensure the token is talking in a secured way. Right now, again, imagine your, for example, one reason is if you are browsing an application in an organization, why do organizations restrict these various sites which are banned? Because you may end up clicking in any of the site, you'll end up clicking on a keylogger or some malware or some way or the other where it gets installed on your browser itself. Okay. Now after that, it'll steal all your cookies. Anything that you're logging in, they have access to everything. Your token, every information is there, right? So this is where user knowledge, end user knowledge is very important when you're dealing with all these things. You may have a very good layer of defense, of security in your organization, where you have a good firewall and then load balancer and then certificate and encryption, everything you're using. But if the user ends up making a small mistake, whatever different layers you put to enhance your security, it is not going to work. But yeah, this is a very good and a difficult question, Pratima. Like to just say that, how do you know? You can put controls, and this is the same question that applies. How do you know that your username and password is not compromised? How do you know that the data that you're logging in, right, like your information inside the AD is not compromised? This question is similar to that. So that is where they go and call the user info endpoint and then retrieve the information, like all of this. I think that flow is not covered here. Let me see. So this is one of the sample if they call the endpoint, but then let's cover it tomorrow. It is a very broad topic. There are so many layers to that, but we can cover the remaining part tomorrow. Any other questions? So I see a lot of people. Yeah, go ahead.
Like I was asking question during the interview that how do we know which grant type how do we suggest the customer on which grant type to be used in OAuth?
Based on the use case.
Yeah. So anyone who wants to answer, I just now answered it, but anyone who wants to go ahead, feel free to answer it. I'll add in if there are anything that is being missed. Shaheen, or I saw few of us, someone also answered the question, right? Yeah, go
Based
ahead.
on the type of application, maybe which type of application it is, we can suggest the grant type. If it's a web application, we can go with auth code. If it's a single page, then we can go with implicit or maybe auth code with Pixie. If it's a machine-to-machine communication, then we can go for client credential. So this is how what application type is. That is how we can suggest the grant type to be used. Or maybe
Absolutely.
Ravi, I have a question. Are you good, Nishchala?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. We were just discussing about the security of token.
Mhm.
I'm not pretty sure. So token, what I understand is it will be encrypted, right? Encryption is there in the token because when we have jot.io, I have seen it has a payload, it has a header. So there I have seen the keys like algorithm and the keys and all, it is there. And I just wanted to be a little bit more clear if you can talk about that. Or maybe you can discuss. There is JWKS URI. Maybe I haven't because integrated much of the OIDC and OAuth.
Mhm.
But there is JWKS URI, where is the public key. So authorization code has a private key, maybe, or it's not always.
No, by default, no. That is how, again, JWKS is when all these encryption flow comes into picture, but by default, not token. All tokens are encrypted. Now, if it would have been encrypted by default, you will not be getting the ability to just copy and put it on jot.io and decode everything. Is jot.io giving you or asking you for any public key, a private key?
No, it'll not. Yeah.
So that means the token is not encrypted. It is open. So that is why you have to put additional security and not let the token just flow randomly on the internet, because anyone can grab it and then go to jot.io and decode it.
Correct.
That's it. Token has a format. To decrypt the format, you have jot.io. That is how you can say it. But it is not encrypted that you are decrypting it there. Because for decryption, you need a key pair, right? A public key and a private key.
Correct.
Yeah. So it is not being decrypted, but we will talk about it, how we can set up certificates and then ensure that even those tools are not able to decrypt it. Then you can say that, okay, your token is actually secured.
Yeah, Ravi, and I wanted to add something.
Yes, please.
There are two things, signing and encrypting. So when we encrypt, obviously you said there's an exchange of certificate and the JOT tokens are signed. And when we sign something, we use an algorithm, which is a mathematical key. So based on that, when you specify the algorithm, they know what kind of key could be used and they are able to decrypt the token. But it is not encrypted, it is signed.
Okay.
I'm just adding few insight here on what is signing and what is all of this. But very good point, Alka. Thank you. And then that, again, that will give you a clarity also, Abhishek. But I know, as the moment you said you have not integrated too many applications, right? I think this is one of the reasons there are a lot of floating questions. Honestly, it takes if you don't understand OAuth and OpenID, right, you will be in a circle, going in circle and having half information for almost 5-6 years, right? And I've seen a lot of people. And because there is few things happening on front end, few things happening on back end, you don't get to see everything. And there are sometimes even developer tools, the inspect that you use, right? That is also not too handy to find those information. So that's fine. We'll cover all of that in the coming session. And I think a lot of your question is around what is happening. I think to know more deep dive in, right? Like first, the information is exchanged, but what happens after the token is given? How can you secure the token? So we will cover those. So now tomorrow we'll cover the two grant types, and then we will go on to the lab section also. Okay, tomorrow if time permits, or I'll give you a few references, you can learn about it, and next weekend we can cover them, lab part. Okay. Fine. Any other questions? But Nishala, did that answer your question? I've also sent you a note on different use cases and the way you can configure various application. What are the scenarios? So just copy it with for you, okay?
Yeah. Because I was asked in more detail.
In sense, what was they expecting?
So you can say that it is more secure if you use authorization. If you use authorization code.
Yeah, that is one of the most secured one. That is how you can start. And then the other three flows are definitely not secured, hence mostly uses for testing purpose or on lower environment, not exposing it too much to go outside. But auth code with Pixie is used mostly.
Pixie is even more secure than authorization code gathering, right?
That's what auth code with Pixie. And now to further increase, you have Depop, okay, the proof of position. So this is how, if you are looking from a security perspective. Now from a user convenience, you have again implicit and client credential, because that is again very quick to set up.